Good morning. Welcome to Connection Valley Church on Zoom. We are so glad that you are here with us today. If it's your first time, we want to let you know that it is our mission to influence people to life-giving connections with Jesus, their family, and the community. And one of the ways that we do this, one of the things that we do to keep that in the forefront of our minds and our hearts is that we partner with local organizations who are already doing great work in our community. And we just come alongside and support them both financially and with volunteer hours. And our community partner for this month is World Relief. They work predominantly with refugees entering our country. And so we are excited to partner with them to give them a financial gift this month. And also we have a volunteer opportunity at the end of the month. Saturday, June 25th, we have the opportunity to volunteer with them at their international festival. And so if you would like to be a part of that, if you're local and you would like to be a part of it, there is a sign up on all of our social media accounts. You can find it there. I'm not 100% sure if it's on our website or not, but the sign up is definitely in the link in our bio on Instagram, and there's also a link on our Facebook page as well for you to sign up and be part of that festival on the 25th, and we are looking forward to being a part of that. If you're here for the first time, we're going to make a $10 donation in your honor to World Relief. So thank you for being here, and thank you to those of you who give financially so that we're able to make those kinds of investments in our community. We want to let you know too that we're hosting our very first Vacation Bible School. The June 21st, 22nd, and 23rd. We'll meet here at our physical location from 9 to noon on those 3 days. And we're really excited about all of the things that we have planned. It's going to be for preschool all the way up to 6th grade. And in fact, we just had a meeting about some of the things that are taking place that week. So we're really excited about that. We would love for you to invite your friends, your neighbors. We have a registration. That would be really helpful if you could go ahead and register your kids or any kids that will be attending. That way we are prepared for them when they show up. And again, that link is going to be on all of our social media pages and our website as well. So I think those are the things I needed to cover with you today. We are in our second week of a series on forgiveness, and I'm really excited about the content of today's message. I think it will be really helpful, and it already has been helpful for me. So I hopefully it'll be helpful for you as well. And so to get us started, I'm going to hand it over to Jim. Jim's going to lead us in a song that he introduced last week. We'll be singing it throughout the series. And so, Jim, it's all you.
Thank you. Gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love, good for all. All who call upon you, you will rescue and forgive. This is why I live. You live the life I could never live. You died the death on that I deserve. You rose to life and now you live. This is how you forgive me. In your mercy, I'm unworthy of your love. All I into running back to you, my gracious King. This is why I sing. You live the life I can never live. You died the death on that I deserve. You rose to life and now you live. That's how you forgive. You live the life I can never live. You died the death on that I deserve. You rose to life and now you live. That's how you forgive. The measure of your love. You came and died for us. Let us not forget. That's how you forgive. turn. You rose to life and now you live. Yeah. You live the life I can never live. You died the death on the night I turned. You rose to life and now you live. But that's how you forgive. The measure of your love. You came and died for us. Let us not forget. That's how you forgive. The measure of your love. You came and died for us. Let us not forget. That's how you forgive. You forgive. You forgive.
So I had a painful experience that goes back a couple years and actually connects beyond a couple years ago. That is in my family. That was occurred in my family. And you guys all know that when you have something that goes bad in your family, well, it's really bad. There's just something about family and things going bad in your family and painful experiences in your family that hit a little bit harder than maybe experiencing pain at the hand of someone else. And so just to give you a little bit of backstory, some of you know that my father passed away in 2014. And around that time, he had been taking care of my grandmother, who had lost my grandfather a few years prior to that. And he would help her with her bills and stuff around the house. And so he was someone that she relied on a good bit. And then when he passed away in 2014, the mantle of responsibility was accepted by my mom, my mother, Teresa, who's watching with us right now on Zoom because she's an amazing person. But so she accepted that mantle of responsibility, was supporting my grandmother and helped her get even moved to another place, actually her house, for a season. And that didn't go so well. So much so where my grandmother moved back into her old house. But when she moved back into her old house, she realized she couldn't take care of herself. So she wanted to then go to an assisted living facility, which was great at first until she didn't want to be there anymore. But her house sold, and so she didn't have the option to go back. And things had been so bad prior when she was staying at my mom's house, it wasn't an option for her to be there, which put my mom in a very difficult circumstance. And here she was serving my grandmother. She had helped do the whole move thing, helping her pay her bills. And this is her mother-in-law, so that makes it complicated. And it got bad. Now, before I go into the details of what ended up happening, my grandmother was one of the most incredible people you would ever know. She was sweet. I mean, she was the essence of a Southern woman, very proper, very gentle. And she was a faith catalyst for our family pretty much coming to know Jesus. She came to know Jesus as an adult, and then was a catalyst to my parents coming to know Jesus, and then ultimately her grandchildren, and then beyond. So her legacy is incredible. But the problem that she began to experience is she was losing her mental faculties, and they were declining. And so she would think clearly one day and then not clearly the next day, or clearly in one moment and then not clearly in another moment. And in those moments she wasn't thinking clearly, she would say and do things that were extremely hurtful. And so the pain that it was causing my mom was hard for me to experience, because I would talk to her and hear how hurt she was. And nobody messes with mama, right? I mean, no one needs to mess with mama. You know, I love my grandmother too. And so this was like the tough place to be in. And there was a particular time where this kind of escalated when my grandmother called DFACS on my mom and made some accusations that weren't true. And ultimately, my mom was cleared of any of those allegations, which was awesome, but the damage was done. And in that time period, I called my grandmother and asked her to stop. And that didn't go so well. She didn't like me telling her what to do. And I bring all that up to you just to say that when someone hurts you, that oftentimes that hurt is not isolated to the individual circumstance that hurt you, because sometimes they continue to hurt you, or the life after they've hurt you is not the same. And so you miss what you had before, and they're just constant reminders of what you've lost. And so the hurt isn't just the facts of what maybe initially happened. It's also the hurt of the impact of what you've lost or what continues to happen. And so when she went to be with Jesus in February of 2020, right before the pandemic, it was actually a relief in one sense, because she was 92 at the time. She wasn't in her best mental state, and she knew the Lord. And so there was all these mixed emotions, but it still didn't take away the pain that was caused and experienced by my mom and by me and our family. And so that's something we've had to work through. That's something that my mom's had to work through. And I share all that with you because you understand what it's like to be impacted by something that someone does that's hurtful, and then to continue to experience the impact of the hurt moving forward. Last week, I talked about two people from the country of Rwanda. And that was significant for us because we had invited a couple guys to speak with us a couple weeks ago about a ministry they're doing. They were from Rwanda and Uganda, respectively, but the same tribe. And the name of their tribe was the Tutsi tribe. And last week, I told you the story of a woman from the Tutsi tribe and a man from the Hutu tribe living as neighbors and living as friends. And the reason why that story is so extraordinary is because the Hutu man murdered the Tutsi woman's husband. See, in 1994, there was a genocide in the country of Rwanda. The Hutus were the dominant tribe. The Tutsis were the less dominant tribe. And the Hutus got upset based on an assassination of a political figure. And so the Hutus then took it upon themselves to go in and try to get rid of all the Tutsis. And the man that I showed you last week actually killed the woman's husband with a machete. I mean, it was brutal. And what makes the story so extraordinary is that woman chose to forgive that man for what he did, because she said she couldn't hold on to that anger any longer. Like, it was so overwhelming. And now they live like next door to each other as neighbors, which that doesn't make any sense, humanly speaking. But I was thinking about this and how the actions of the Hutu man back in like 1994 still impact this woman today in 2022. Like, for instance, when she goes to bed at night and her husband's not there, that's a reminder of the loss that she's experienced. Or when she sees married couples together, enjoying life together, it's a reminder of what she's lost, that life and the after is not the same as it was before, and that she is now continuing to experience the impact of the pain dealt by the blow of this man's hand years ago against her husband. And I was thinking about like special occasions, and we celebrate Thanksgiving and Christmas and birthdays, and usually at those occasions there are people around us that we love the most. And she lost the ability to have her husband there because of that man, yet she's chosen to forgive him. But I was thinking that, while it would be idealistic to say, I'm sure she never struggles with bitterness anymore, I imagine there are times where she struggles with that bitterness and then is faced with a decision again on whether or not she forgives or holds a grudge and is bitter. And as I was thinking about you guys, as I was thinking about my life and us collectively, we have people in our lives who have caused us pain. And the pain that they've caused us has left a mark. The pain they've caused us was still being felt in the present. It wasn't just isolated to the facts of whatever happened. And in some cases, it's ongoing. And like, for instance, we understand the idea of an ex-boyfriend, an ex-girlfriend, an ex-husband, an ex-wife, or maybe just an ex-friend, someone that you used to be tight with, but you're not anymore. Something happened, an incident happened. You can probably think back to that incident. And so you're not friends anymore. You're not together anymore. And in the world of social media, they may post a picture of them with their new group of friends, or with a new woman or a new man. And for people that have been in that position, which a lot of us have, at least at the friendship level, that can be hurtful. And it can remind us of the pain that they caused us, maybe when the relationship went sideways. And we're still feeling it now in the present from something that happened a long time ago. The impact of the pain is still with us, which makes forgiveness difficult. Or like me, this past week, I'd put out a social media post and I had someone respond on my social media post that I haven't spoken to in a few years. And the reason I haven't spoken to this person is I haven't been in proximity with them, first of all. But secondly, there was a hurtful interaction that made me say, you know what? I'm good. I need to draw a boundary here. And this person hasn't shown any kind of interest in connecting, but they felt the freedom, the audacity to chime in with a comment on a social media post I did, like nothing had ever happened. And I got to be real with you. Not that I wouldn't be otherwise, but I got to be real with you. I didn't like it. It did stir up some feelings in me. It reminded me that the fact of what happened 2+ years ago, 3 years ago, whatever, is now still being felt today. And so I had a decision to make. Do I forgive, or do I go to bitterness and holding a grudge? Now I could play this out even further. Some of us have had dads that were like not good dads, maybe deadbeat dads, or dads who made promises to show up at ball games, or dads who were, maybe working all the time. And then they became grandfathers, and they were amazing grandfathers, but they were lousy dads. Or maybe that's the case with your mom. She was a lousy mom, but she's a great grandmother. And you see this human being that you knew as mom or knew as dad, who now is killing it as grandpa or grandma, and you're reminded of what you didn't have because of now what they're doing for your grandkids. And so on one level, you're grateful that your grandkids are experiencing a person who made progress in their lives, but on the other hand, it's a reminder of what you didn't get. And so you're still feeling the impact of the pain that you felt back when you were younger. Or maybe this, there's a person you used to work with, they're an ex-coworker, and they're killing it, at least by what they maybe post on social media right now, or what you hear through the grapevine. But they stepped all over you to get to where they are. And so you see that post, or you hear about what's happening with them, and it's just like that pain can feel fresh, and you feel feelings that you thought you had dealt with a long time ago, but they're still there. And so then you have a decision to make. Do I forgive, or do I not forgive? And one of the questions I think we all have to ask, and I probably do ask, is there a limit to forgiveness? Or should there be a limit to forgiveness? And I really want to address this question today, because how we answer this question will go a long way toward determining how healthy we are relationally, how much we're able to offer ourselves and be present and actually love people. And the great thing about Jesus is, while Jesus was on this earth in the first century, he told stories and spoke truths that still impact us now, just like they did in the first century. Because the people in the first century, while they were maybe different in their customs and their way of life and in their language from us, they're all made of the same dirt. So they struggle with some of the same things that we struggle with. And Jesus had some followers. We know him as the disciples. And one of the most outspoken disciples was a guy named Peter. And if you've been around the church for a while, you know Peter was one that would say what he was thinking. Like sometimes he would speak without thinking. Maybe you know someone like that. I've been that person before, guilty as charged. But Peter was one that would speak his mind. He was one that would ask questions that no one else would ask. And sometimes, you like Peter, you like the people that are like Peter, and then sometimes you can't stand them. But either way, Peter asked a question that's recorded by Jesus's disciple Matthew and is contained in the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 18. He asked a question about forgiveness that's powerful and that connects to what we're talking about today. And Peter asked this of Jesus. He said, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? How many times? What he's asking is there a limit to forgiveness? Like when is it like you're done? Like you fooled me once, shame on you. You got to make sure you say that right. Fool me twice, shame on me. You've heard people say that sometimes wrong before they get it mixed up, like Michael Scott on The Office. But he's asking how many times? And in Jewish culture, it's important to know in the first century that the standard was 3 times. You had 1 strike, 2 strike, 3 strikes, but after that 3rd strike, you had no more chances. You were out. You were dead to that person. And you were freed up to not have to forgive them anymore, according to the Jewish law in the first century, and according to how the rabbis would teach. So Peter comes in and he says, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? He says, up to 7 times. And like Peter asking this question, I can imagine he's feeling magnanimous. Like he's feeling like, wow, this is like big time. I've doubled the standard of 3 and I've added 1, 7 times. And Jesus, well, he answers this question in a way I think that caught Peter off guard, because Peter thought he was like busting the curve. And Jesus answers this way. He says, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Or in some translations, there's 7 times 70, which is 490. And some of you are like, your math whizzes. It's like, you were right there, 490 times. Now, it's important to note that Jesus is not saying you need to count, I forgive you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, you can't keep up with that. Like how many times you forgive someone when you're talking about 77 or 490 times. And so like Jesus raises a standard to say, you need to forgive as many times as you need to forgive. And I imagine there's still some confusion and maybe some jaws are like, okay, I don't quite understand that. So Jesus tells a story. Tells a story to illustrate this principle of forgiveness. And in Matthew chapter 18, verse 23, he says, okay, so therefore the kingdom of heaven, my kingdom, the kingdom that transcends this earth, it's like a king. It's like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. So picture a king that has a bunch of servants and he wants to settle up with what they owe him. Like he has given them things, he's given them money, and now it's time to pay the piper, so to speak. And so he calls in this first guy, and as it reads in verse 24, as he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold or talents, which is like a lot of money. This guy comes in, 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. I mean, this would be like gold everywhere, gold coins everywhere. And the equivalent to today with how much money this would be like billions of dollars. This is a debt that this servant could not repay. And Jesus is using an extreme example here to make a point. 10,000 bags of gold. And in verse 25, we know that he wasn't able to pay. And since he wasn't able to pay, the master, the king, ordered that he and his wife and his children and all he had be sold to repay the debt. Now, that sounds pretty hardcore, in my opinion. But when we're talking millions, billions of dollars. And so it's like, hey, you're gonna be sold, your wife's gonna be sold, your children are gonna be sold. And I just can imagine this guy's guts just drop. He's like, I don't stand a chance. And we see this displayed in his response in verse 26 of this story. At this, the servant, he fell on his knees. So just close your eyes for a second and imagine this guy falling on his knees in a posture of absolute need. I need you to release me of this. And he says, be patient with me. He's begging, I will pay back everything. You can't pay back everything. I can imagine, this is my imagination, it's not here in the scriptures, but I imagine tears are streaming down his face because he's thinking about what's going to happen to himself, going to jail, his wife or being sold to somebody, his wife being sold to somebody, his kids being sold to somebody, and all that was going to be lost based on the fact that he couldn't repay his debt. And upon seeing this servant so broken, in verse 27, the servant's master, the king, took pity on him. He saw him desperate, and took pity on him. And he canceled the debt. That would have been unthinkable. People would be listening to the story in the first century, and we can think about it right here, right now. If you had $1 billion debt, which, I mean, I don't think any of us have $1 billion debt, even though sometimes debt can feel like $1 billion, like it's something you can't dig out of. And someone canceled it completely, we'll say $100,000 or $10,000, and they just canceled it like that. Can you imagine the relief you would feel? This is like billions of dollars worth of debt. Like, this is huge. This is nothing he could ever repay. And he canceled it, and he let him go. He freed him up. And he didn't do anything to earn or deserve it. He pleaded for forgiveness, and he got it. Now, this would have been unthinkable, but his response, the servant's response beyond this situation, this is where the story goes wonky. In verse 28, when the servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. So we had 10,000 bags of gold, and now we're talking, well, 100 silver coins. And he grabbed this guy, and he began to choke him. Now, wait a minute. Do you see a disconnect here? On one hand, you have this king, this master, forgive this servant of a debt of 10,000 bags of gold, a huge debt he can never repay. This other person has a debt of 100 silver coins, which would be the equivalent of like 4 months of wages for like a baseline worker. And instead of forgiving him of his debt, he grabs him and chokes him. I don't know if he put him in a headlock, if Jesus is picturing like a headlock, or if he went two hands to the throat, or, he went like MMA style with a rear naked choke. I'm not exactly sure what it looked like. But this guy is assaulting the servant for not being able to repay this much smaller debt when he was just forgiven of having to repay a much greater debt. And he says, pay back what you owe me, he demanded. And guess what happened? The servant who owed him the silver coins, the much smaller debt, took on the same posture he took on with the king when he was asking to be forgiven of his huge debt. The fellow servant fell to his knees and he begged him, be patient with me. Tears probably streaming down his face. And he said, I will pay it back. Now, what do you think the servant who had been forgiven of a great debt did? You would think that he would say, you know what? You're good. You're good, bro. I've been forgiven of a huge debt. I can forgive you of this much smaller debt. But he didn't do that. In verse 30, we see what happens. He refused to forgive the guy. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into jail until he could pay the debt. And how's he going to pay the debt in jail? This guy's going to be in jail probably for life. And when the other servants saw what happened, because people were watching, they were outraged at the injustice. They saw the hypocrisy of the man who had been forgiven of this huge debt, not forgive the man who had the minuscule debt. And so they went and they told the king, the master, everything that happened. And here's the moment in the story where the music changed, just like a movie where the music changes and you know, oh, something's about to happen. This is where the music changes, when the master and the king finds out that this man held this guy to this high standard of this, for this small debt, when he was released of the big debt and forgiven of the big, huge debt that he could never repay. The master calls the servant in. He said, "You wicked servant, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you?" In anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed, which is essentially a life sentence. Now, when you look at this story, think about yourself. Who has hurt you? Who has hurt you and you're still feeling the impact of it? Based on what we see with what Jesus is teaching about forgiveness, how many times should you forgive? You see, we see Jesus making it limitless. We see Jesus taking forgiveness extremely seriously. And the reason we know he took it so seriously is not just because of this story, but because he ended up going and giving his life, sacrificing his life on a cross so that you and I could experience the forgiveness of the sins that we commit that create a huge gap that we could never repay, in order that we could be connected with a perfect and holy God who made us and created us to be with him, but he gave us a free will. And so there is a degree of free will that we have a choice. And based on what happened in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve and their choice to sin, we were born into that sin. And so Jesus came in his graciousness, and he came in and bridged the sin gap between us and God the Father. And by merely believing in him, we can experience that forgiveness and that freedom. And so when it comes to other people, what Jesus is saying is, instead of just believing and being like, hey, I'm good with God, instead of just believing, I want you to follow. You see, because forgiving other people requires something of us. It requires us to not just rest in our beliefs and say, well, I'm good, my beliefs are good. It actually requires us to do something. And to forgive is to follow Jesus, because Jesus set the example by forgiving us of our big sin debt. Jesus didn't just come so you could have the right beliefs. He came so you could be his disciple and follow him. And this is hard, because experiencing the emotions that come with the pain that happened in a moment and that continue to be felt by us, the impact, the ongoing impact of that pain can make this very dicey. And it's why it's important for us to look at the example of Jesus. In Romans chapter 6, verse 10, the Apostle Paul writes that the death Jesus died, he died to sin once and for all, but the life he lives to God. Jesus's death on the cross was good enough for you and me. It was good enough for you and me to be forgiven. And that by putting our belief in him, we receive his forgiveness. But then he invites us to live life by following him. And we do that. One aspect of doing that is to forgive those who have wronged us. Now, to help you think about the application of this for you and for me, I want to tell you what happened in 2015. In 2015, there was a church in Charleston, South Carolina. Some of you know this story. It was Mother Emanuel AME Church. It's a pretty big name for a church, but Mother Emanuel AME Church. And the reason I bring up this church is a church became famous based on a extremely painful incident that happened in 2015. And in 2015 in Charleston, South Carolina, on I think it was a Tuesday or Wednesday night, a young man walked in to be part of a prayer meeting at this church, but he was not really there to be part of the prayer meeting. He had much more evil intent in mind. He was carrying a gun and he was ready to kill people. So he walks into this meeting. He stays in the meeting, the prayer meeting, the entire time until the end. And in the closing prayer, he pulls out the gun and he shoots 70 bullets, 50 of them striking human targets, taking 9 lives. And the reason why I'm talking about this today is not because of this guy coming in and doing this, but it's the response of the family members of the victims from this church. Their response was so extraordinary that they've made a documentary that is inspiring people to think about forgiveness in a brand new way. One of the victims of family members whose mom died is a guy named Chris Singleton. And Chris Singleton was 18 years old at the time that Dylan Roof walked into this church and shot and killed his mom. And he got a phone call that your mom has been shot and killed. Dylan Roof went in that day with the intent to harm the people of that church because they were Black. And Chris Singleton, as did everyone else that I've read about with this church, chose to forgive Dylan. Now, do you think for a second that Chris Singleton still doesn't experience the impact of what Dylan did? And yet he goes around to schools and corporations throughout America, and he has a platform to speak about this superpower of forgiveness, as he calls it. And one of the things he tells people is he quotes a guy named Chuck Swindoll, and he says this, that 10% of your life is action. The other 90% is reaction. 10% of your life is action. The other 90% is reaction. And so Chris has chosen not to give Dylan power over him by forgiving him, by reacting with forgiveness time and time again, even when his mom is not there to be there for his wedding or his kid, the birth of his kids, or all the life things that happen. And she was like his biggest fan. She's not there to be that cheerleader for him anymore. He chooses time and time again, even with the impact of the pain that Dylan caused him, to say, you know what? I forgive you. And I know for some of you to hear this story, it's like, how do you do that? Well, that wasn't the end. There's other people that were pretty extraordinary in their expressions of forgiveness. And I want to tell you about one other guy. It's a guy named Anthony Thompson. Anthony Thompson is a pastor of Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston. And Anthony's wife, Myra, who was aspiring to be a minister and training to become a minister, was also shot and killed that day. I got to listen to Anthony on a NPR 6-minute interview, talk about how he met Myra. And you could tell like this man was giddy with excitement, talking about what he felt when he met his wife, what she was like. Like it brought Myra to life, even though we've never met her. And Dylan, of course, went in that day and shot Myra, killed Myra. And in court, Pastor Thompson, he forgave Dylan, even though Dylan is still unrepentant to this day. Dylan is still standing by his white supremacist views on why he did what he did, which is heinous. But Anthony Thompson said this because someone asked him, aren't you letting Dylan off the hook by forgiving him? Aren't you letting him just like, he got away with it? And Reverend Thompson said this in response to that question. I've told people that forgiveness, it's not for the perpetrator. Forgiveness is not for Dylan. Like me forgiving is It's not for him or the offender. Forgiveness is for the victim. I hope you hear that. Forgiveness is for the victim. He said, I didn't let Dylan off the hook. Dylan is in prison, but I'm free. And it changed Charleston. And as a result of Reverend Thompson's reaction to this and continued reaction to this, and as a result of guys like Chris Singleton's reaction to this, there's been a lot of racial reconciliation in the city of Charleston. God bringing good out of a horrible circumstance. And what I want you to hear, if you don't hear me say anything else today, is that forgiveness or forgiving someone that hurts you helps you. I'm going to say that again because I want to make sure I say this right. Forgiving someone that hurts you helps you. It helps me. Be free. Be free of bitterness. Be free of resentment. And to be able to love, to use that energy to love other people. Because we have one life to live. You think about the lives that inspire you, the ones that are characterized by bitterness and resentment and grudges. They don't have a platform like Chris Singleton. They don't have a platform like Anthony Thompson. But when you choose to forgive someone who's hurt you, you realize forgiveness is for you. And maybe it impacts other people, which is pretty powerful. See, forgiving those who hurt you helps you. So maybe you've got someone in mind, you probably do, that's hurt you, that you're experiencing not just the pain of what they did, but the ongoing impact in your life. You know, your before and after is different because of what they did. I want to encourage you to pray this prayer. And I'm going to read this prayer to you. And there are two places where you can place their name, and I'll guide you in this. And then later, I'm going to actually send you this in an email, so that if you need to keep this in front of you to continue to pray this prayer, to not just stick with, I'm going to forgive them one time, or I'm going to forgive them 2 times, but to keep doing it 3 and 4 and 5, especially when those emotions come up, so that you can be free. I want you to have that in your hands. And I want to say one other thing about this before I lead you in this prayer. Most of the time, when you need to forgive, you're not going to feel like doing it. But you don't have to wait for your emotions to catch up to you feeling like forgiving to forgive. Forgiveness is a choice. And so when you choose to step into that, your emotions over time, they will catch up. And you maybe feel something different than you did before. But you have to keep practicing over and over and over, because there's no limit to forgiveness. And aren't you glad that Jesus doesn't limit his forgiveness of you? That when he looks at you after you've put your belief in him, that your past sin, your present sin, and your future sin is paid in full. So right now, I want to share this prayer with you, and you can put someone's name in the blank if you have them in your head right now. God, this person really hurt me. Sometimes it still hurts. But because I want to be free from resentment and filled with your love, I'm choosing to release my right to get even and wish bad on that person. I'm choosing to bless those who hurt me. God, I pray you'll bless their life, not because they deserve it. They don't. But I don't deserve your blessing either. I pray that you would show mercy to them like you've shown mercy to me. Now I'm going to pray for you as we move forward, and Jim's going to lead us in a song. Heavenly Father, I pray that your Spirit would lead us, that your Spirit would guide us into truth, to walk in your truth, and not just to say we believe, but that we actually follow because of what you've done for us. through Jesus. So we thank you for an opportunity to take another step today in experiencing the freedom that can only be experienced when we choose to rest in the forgiveness you gave us and then give that to other people. Understanding that this helps us when we've been hurt time and time again. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
We pray for revival. We start on our knees. Spirit of God, pour out on us. Whatever it looks like, wherever you lead. Spirit of God, pour out on us. Spirit of God, pour out on us. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, chains will be broken. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, miracles come to pass. We pray, Spirit of God, pour out on us. We pray for revival. We start on our knees. Spirit of God, pour out on us. Whatever it looks like, whatever you lead. Spirit of God, pour out on us. Spirit of God, pour out on us. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is a freedom. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, chains will be broken. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, miracles come to pass. We pray, Spirit of God, pour out on us. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, fear has no power. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, breakthrough is coming. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, restoration will happen. Spirit of God, pour out on us. Spirit of God, pour out on us. We need your direction, holy interruption. Lead us back to you. 'Cause we need your perspective. Fix our eyes on heaven. Turn our hearts to you. We won't leave this moment, not going through the motions, crying out to you. We're not here to panic, we're ready and we're waiting for the Holy Spirit to move. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, chains will be broken. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, miracles come to pass. We pray, Spirit of God, pour out on us. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, fear has no power. Where the Spirit of God, pour out on us. Spirit of God, pour out on us. We pray for revival. We start on our knees. Spirit of God, pour out on us. Whatever it looks like, wherever you lead. Spirit of God, pour out on us. Spirit of God, pour out on us.
Man, I love that new song. So thank you for choosing it. I feel like that's one we need to do again soon. So thank you, Jim, for helping to really bring everything together with that, because we do need God's Spirit to guide us into truth. We need His Spirit to give us the power to do the things like forgiving those who have hurt us. Appreciate you being here today. Next week, we're going to talk about one thing that we can do to help us really move forward in relational health around this whole issue of forgiveness. So I hope you'll be able to join us again for that, and even invite a friend, because I imagine that you know people that struggle with what we're talking about, and they could benefit from being a part of this. I do also want to let you know that as a church, we have an in-person service at 9 o'clock currently. And we have meeting space for our family ministries in addition to having meeting space for our adult service. The place where we meet is in a mall, and it's for sale. And at some point, we're probably going to have to find somewhere else to meet. Now, nothing is imminent as far as like it's going to happen tomorrow, but just know that we are actively keeping our eyes open for potential future locations for Connection Valley Church. And I want to say, if you've got any kind of insight or you know of a potential opportunity for us, I would love for you to share it. And I want to say thank you for those of you who give financially, because you're helping us prepare for this future. In addition to having our very first Vacation Bible School for kids this next week, because it's pretty incredible to be able to connect kids to Jesus. And so we're going to have a focused time to do that, not this next week, but the week after. Thanks again for being here.